My name is Taylor Goldman. I'm in 4B, and this is my video on the photosynthesis process.
The process of photosynthesis is done in plant cells to convert carbon dioxide and water into glucose and oxygen. It is done in the chloroplast of plant cells, which is illustrated by the diagram here. Today I will be talking about how each aspect of photosynthesis has its own unique part and what it does during the photosynthesis process. The first material I'm going to explain in photosynthesis is water. Water diffuses into the cell from the outside of the cell because cells need enough water to function. Once it's in the cell, it goes to the thylakoid, which is one of the discs in the chloroplast. It is used in the light reaction as the water is split into oxygen and hydrogen, which processes the hydrogen ions that will go into the chain. Once water is split into hydrogen and oxygen, it is no longer existing and is no longer in the process. Next, I will be tracing light energy. Light energy comes from outside from the sun and goes to the outside of the thylakoid. This light is used in the light reaction as it is used to power the photosystems that are part of the light reaction. Once the light energy powers the photosystems, it is no longer existing as it has already been used, so the light energy is done with its job. Next is NADP, which is already existing in the cell in the stroma, which is the fluid around the inside of the chloroplast. Once in the stroma, NADP is used in the light reaction. NADP is an electron transport carrier, which means it gains an ion by picking up a high-energy electron and is converted from NAD to NADPH, which is then carried to the Calvin cycle. Once it is converted to NADPH, it does not become NADP again until this action is done with the Calvin cycle, and then the NADPH loses a molecule, and NADP is then recreated again and cycled back to do its job again. Since NADP is already existing in the cell, once it is turned to NADPH, when going to the Calvin cycle, it returns back to its original state in the stroma. Next is ADP. ADP comes from the cell and is already in the cell. It is located in the stroma, which is the general fluid inside the chloroplast. ADP is used in the light reaction because it is used in ATP synthase to become ATP, which is the energy. Once ADP becomes ATP, it is no longer existing and then is done with its part of photosynthesis. NADPH comes from the cell and is made in the light reaction as the molecule of NADP gained a hydrogen ion. NADPH is used over here in the Calvin cycle. It powers the production of sugars in the cell, and once it has powered that production by carrying electrons, it loses the phosphate group of H and goes back to NADP in the light reactions. NADPH becomes non-existent when it loses that phosphate group. ATP comes from the ADP molecules that were existing in the cell during ATP synthase. It goes into the stroma and is used in the Calvin cycle. ATP converts carbon dioxide to sugar and powers the production of sugar, which is the ultimate goal of photosynthesis. Once it loses a phosphate group, ATP turns back to ADP and returns to the light reaction. Once it loses that phosphate, ATP is no longer existent. Glucose is the ultimate product of everything occurring in here and is the goal of photosynthesis. It is made in the Calvin cycle, or it is right here, and exits the chloroplast as a product. Glucose is used as energy and insulin for the cell and is very important because it is the final product of the Calvin cycle. Glucose is to be a product, but is then used as a reactant for the for the process of cellular respiration. Oxygen is another product of photosynthesis, and oxygen comes from the water molecule in the beginning that is separated in the beginning of the light reaction. Oxygen exits the thylakoid once it is made from the water molecule and is released as a waste product. This is a product of a light reaction, and once released as waste, goes on to become a reactant of cellular respiration. Carbon dioxide is another reactant of photosynthesis and enters the cell by coming through the pores on the leaves of a plant. Once diffusing into the cell, it diffuses into the chloroplast and is in the stroma, which is the general fluid. Carbon dioxide is used in the Calvin cycle, which is the last part of photosynthesis. Carbon dioxide is used to build G3Ps, and once two G3Ps combine, glucose is made. Once carbon dioxide makes the G3Ps, it is no longer existing and has done its job as a reactant in the photosynthesis process. The last component of photosynthesis I will be talking about is hydrogen. Hydrogen comes from the water molecules that entered the cell, and the water molecules are split into hydrogen and oxygen molecules. The existing hydrogen molecules build up in the inner membrane of the chloroplast. Energized electrons in the electron transport chain pump hydrogen ions into the thylakoid. Once these hydrogen ions are into the thylakoid, they power ATP synthase, which produces ATP, which is built from existing ADP molecules. The importance of hydrogen is that it is used in the light reaction to power ATP synthase to produce ATP, which is the energy from the cell. Once it is used to produce ATP, it is no longer existing and is done with its job. Those are the paths each of the aspects of photosynthesis take. The ultimate goal of photosynthesis is to create the products of sugar, also called glucose, and oxygen, as it is released as a waste product. Once these are created by the many different parts of photosynthesis, the process is complete.